and welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And so what we're doing is we went back to the beginning of the Torah, to Genesis, and just finished the Torah Temimah on chapter 1, and here we are started chapter 2 of Genesis. So it starts, of course, Vaychulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am. The heavens and the earth were completed and all their array, something like that. And we actually we had started looking at this last week, but I'll go back. This is the source that Baruch Halevi Epstein is bringing to bear on this particular verse, specifically the part of the verse that says "V'chol tzva'am" and all their array. And this is a quote, and here is where the source is: Rosh Hashanah, the tractate Rosh Hashanah in the Talmud, page 11a. So, and one other thing that he does is, if the language in the original source is somewhat convoluted or corrupted, or however you want to say it, he will put it. One thing he does do is try and put it in a clear way, as clear as he can. Amar Rabbi Joshua ben Levi, said Rabbi Joshua ben Levi, Kol ma'aseh bereshit b'komatan. All the creation, the entire creation was done, the komatam, in its full stature. Sharstein was the one he's translated this part of Torah Temimah as far as I'm aware, and he translates that as koma means your stature, in full stature, nivra'u, right? They were created, fully developed. L'da'atan nivra'u, they were done with their cognition, they knew, or it was with their consent, something like that, right? It was done. They were aware of what was happening, and they were in consent with that. L'tzivyonan nivra'u, in other words, and they were also created according to their desires. We've already looked at this little piece here down below. We did that last Sunday, but so I'm going to keep going. Shene'emar, as it says, Vaychulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am. This is, of course, quoting our verse, right? The heavens and the earth were completed and all their array. Al tikra tzva'am. Don't read this word as tzva'am, ela tzivyonam, but read this as the word tzivyonam. Don't read it as meaning their host, but basically according to their desires. Now, I will say that, that an aleph and a yud are interchangeable. They're letters that sometimes change in various forms. So it's not like it's totally a different word. It is a different word in the sense of what it means, but nevertheless, there is some sense of connection grammatically or orthographically in those words. But Baruch Halevi Epstein is going to go into that a little bit more. He's not going to just let that pass. So, Yitachen, it would appear, to midayek mishum lefi chukei halashon, that there's a reason in terms of the language of this verse that gives Rabbi Joshua ben Levi reason to say what he said. In other words, there's a sense in which the actual expression, the way this sentence is being expressed, according to the rules of grammar, doesn't fit well. That's what he's saying. Hayat tzarich lomar, because if it were to follow the rules of grammar, the word that it should have used in the text isn't v'chol tzva'am, it should have been v'chol tziv'otehem. In other words, according to all their, each group, each species, according to all their species, something like that. And that's the word. V'lashon tzva'am, however, the word tzva'am, their host, mashma she'tzva echad l'shamayim v'la'aretz. That is to say that to use the word tzva'am has the implication that there is one, in other words, one form of the heavens and the earth. that the entire creation is one species, so to speak, or one form. Uve'emet, and in fact, halo shonim he, but they're different. Certainly, heaven and earth are very different from each other. V'lachen darish, and for this reason, this pushes Rabbi Joshua ben Levi to come up with another way of looking at this. V'lachen darish, and for that reason, he interprets al derech asmachta, and he does this by the suggestion. Asmachta is a kind of proof that's not compelling, but is a supportive. In other words, where you find support for an opinion, that would be lismoch means to support, right? To depend on. And so an asmachta is a suggestive proof, the chod tzivionam. So that's why he uses this term, the chod tzivionam. That's not enough, though, obviously. More needs to be said, and he's going to say more. The hine, right? And in fact, lo mitba'er, but it's not so clear. Me'en derish mikan od komatam v'ladatam. Well, okay, fine, tzivionam, we can deal with it. But remember, he doesn't stop there. He says, komatam, he says their stature, ulada'atam, and according to their knowledge, their awareness, right? The efshar lomar. So one can say, de be'inyan tzivionam kalul hakol, that when you say it was according to their desires, that actually includes both their stature and their consciousness, their awareness, their agreement, something like that. The acharei de biur milat tzivionam, right? Because after we look at the explanation of this word tzivionam, hu milashon tzvi. It is from a word, it's derived from a word tzvi, ufa'er, right? This is something he mentioned above, where there's a verse, I think it's on Isaiah, Isaiah 28, and there where he talks about grace and beauty, that it's related to a word that means grace and beauty. Kamosha katavnu, as we wrote already. It's up here where he mentions it. Right here, somewhere there, right? So that's the reference in Isaiah 28. Let's find out. Okay. Ve'im lo hayu bekomatam ein bahem hidur, because if they were not in their full size, right, in their developed size, they would not be as beautiful in that case. In other words, they would not have achieved their full level of beauty. V'chein kalul b'milat tzva'am, right? And likewise, in this word tzva'am, retzonam, there also is included in a connotation of that word is their desire. And how does he get that? He's going to give you proof of that. Let's see. Ki shoresh tzava, because the root tzadik beit aleph, the aramit in Aramaic, inyano, it has the meaning of ratzon, desire, the heskem, and agreement. Kemevu'ar kama pa'amim b'sefer Daniel, as is clarified in several times, right, in the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel, a lot of the book of Daniel, most of it, is written in Aramaic. And he's saying Daled Zion, he's saying chapters 4 through 7, Hava Tzava, right? He desired it, he wanted it. Adayin Tzavit, lit, okay? So you still wanted, or you had at that point desired, litzba va'od, and another version of this, all meaning having the idea of desire, agreement, etc. Umashe katavnu, right? And what we have written, the darish tzva'am miloshon tzvi v'tifara, and regarding the meaning of this word tzava to come from from language that means grace and beauty, it's worth bringing a proof for this, ulefaresh imzeh, and to explain with this, halashon marot tzvaot, right? And that is to look at the language that is mentioned at the end of Leviticus in in the end of Exodus Vayakel, in the Parsha Vayakel, which talks about the bronze laver that was in the front of the tabernacle, that was made from the mirrors, okay, of the serving women, of the women. But tzvaot, okay, why this word referring to these women? Right? She'inyano, that what it's referring to is hamarot, that is to say the mirrors, shahayu hanashim mekashtot umefa'arot atzman bahem. In other words, it was referring to these mirrors which women would adorn and beautify themselves with these mirrors. V'iyen sham barashi, and he says, take a look at the Rashi there, shepiresh tzvaot, right? So he explains the word tzvaot. This is this word, right? Marot hatzvaot, from the language of tzava v'kibbutz. So there he understands it as meaning a group of people. The eino pirush meraveach, I think I'm going to say, right? That is not really a helpful interpretation. Ulefi ma shekatavnu, but if you look at what we wrote, that is to say that if we understand this marot hatzavaot as saying these mirrors with which the women adorn themselves, using hatzvaot meaning something with which you can beautify and make yourself look graceful, right? Then that word tzvaot makes sense, right? More sense. Ulefi ma yitba'er hetev, it becomes clarified. That's why the Torah used the word tzvaot there, and not to mean a gathering or a group, but rather to say that these are the mirrors that they used to adorn themselves and to beautify themselves. So that takes care of that particular comment. On to verse 2. Bayom Hashvi'i. So let's take a look at the verse in the Torah. Vaychal Elohim Bayom Hashvi'i, and God completed on the seventh day Melachto Asher Asa, his work which he had performed on the seventh day. Vayishbot Bayom Hashvi'i, and he rested, he ceased from work on the seventh day. Mikol Melachto, from all the work, all the labor, Asher Asa, which he had performed. Okay. So we're going to look at this, it's over here, Bayom Hashvi'i, right, on the seventh day. Maaseh Betalmai HaMelech, we've had a comment like this before. There was a situation, an incident, a occurrence, involving Ptolemy the king, King Ptolemy, Shekines Ayin Bet Tzedekainim, who brought together 72 elders, Vechnisan B'Ayin Bet Abatim, and he put them into 72 different homes. For Amar, and he said to them, commanded them, L'chol Echad, to each one, Kitvu li Torat Moshe Rabchen, write for me, meaning in Greek, right? In Greek, the Torah of Moses, your teacher, your master. Now, so each individual, and this is the origin of the Septuagint, the Greek, the very early Greek translation of the Bible, actually. Natan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Eitzah Belev Kol Echad Ve'echad. God put a thought or a suggestion or the advice into each and everyone's heart. V'katvu, and they wrote for him, Vaychal Elohim Bayom HaShishi, that God completed on the sixth day, Vayishbot Bayom HaShvi'i, and he rested on the seventh day. That this is what they wrote in Greek in translating the Hebrew. So they did not translate the Hebrew literally. They put obviously an interpretation, but every one of them put the same interpretation, That's the point being made here, that everyone did the same thing. And this is from Tractate Megillah. Let's take a look here where it was. Find it. Here it is. Here's the note, Dalet, the footnote Dalet. Kedei shelo yomar. So why did they do this, he's saying? So that they wouldn't say, he wouldn't say, Devayom hashvi'i gamar malachto, so that it wouldn't suggest that the work was actually completed on the seventh day, uve'emet, and in fact, hevei bi'ur halashon vaychal bayom hashvi'i, and when you actually understand the idea of completed on the seventh day, shelayom hashvi'i kvar kalta hamalacha, that when it says he completed it on the seventh day, it didn't mean he finished the job on the seventh day, but rather that the job was finished by the seventh day. And that's the vaychal, that's the meaning of the Hebrew here. Ukamo bi'ur halashon, and we have another example in another parsha, where it says, when we clarify the language in the Torah, ach bayom harishon tashbita so'or, it says, however, on the first day you shall remove all leaven, in Parshat Bo, in the Parsha Bo, shepirusho, that the language actually means, shelayom harishon, that by the first day shel chag of the festival, kvar yiheh nishbat, right? That it needs to be removed, right? Tashbitu, that it needs to be removed by the seventh day, by the first day of the holiday. In other words, by the time you hit the first day of Pesach, there should be no leaven in your home. It doesn't mean to actually do the removal on the first day. It means on the first day, it should all have been removed. So there's now a question. And so we have to explain, well, why didn't they just say that? Why didn't they just say it in a way that it would have meant exactly that, lifnei talmai, before Talmi? Umishum, the reason for that is, de ulai lo haya makabel pirush there, that it's possible he would not have thought that that was an accurate interpretation. He wouldn't have accepted that meaning of vaychulu, or vaychal, that it meant it was already completed. Mipnei she'ulai haya rotzeh limtso ilah b'Torah, and the reason is that perhaps Ptolemy's intention, right, that the reason he was asking this to do this is that he wanted to find some falsehood in the Torah, in Moses' Torah, kamoshe katavnu, as we've already written, Reish Parsha HaKodemet, at the beginning of the previous Parsha, the previous chapter. Uma shelo katva be'emet haTorah. And now we have to go back and say, well, why didn't the Torah itself, right? Why indeed didn't the Torah say, Vaychal bayom hashishi? Why doesn't it simply say that he completed on the sixth day, right? Kedei sheyeh halashon, just so that the language, the expression, yoter mevorah, would be clear. There'd be no question that it was done by the end of the sixth day, and that when it says completed on the seventh day, it means it had already been completed. Hu kamoshe katavnu b'midrash Rabbah, and this follows an explanation that we see in the Midrash Rabbah. Sha'akadosh Baruch Hu yodea lekavein itim b'regaim, that God, the Holy One, blessed be He, is capable of being absolutely precise about times and moments. The imkain, and if that is the case, if shar lichtov be meforash, right, and if that's the case, one can write. I believe this is saying, with regards to God, meforash, explicitly, shekala beknisat yom hashvi'i, that you can. That's why you can say that he ended as the seventh day came in, mamash umetzumtzam, right? That was actually the case, precisely. In other words, that the moment the sixth day was over, and the moment that, at that very precise moment that the seventh day began, God had completed the work of creation. Lo kamo basar v'adam, this is not like mortal human beings, shemipnei she'ifshar lo litzamtzem, because it's impossible for human beings to be this precise, to be down to the nanosecond, right? Mosif michol al hakodesh. For that reason, you have to add from a weekday onto the holy day. In other words, that part of that would have been happening. We wouldn't be able to really tell. And by the way, I don't know if he's referring here to the fact that we do that in practice, that the reason why candle lighting is 18 minutes before the actual Shabbat begins is because of that lack of accuracy. And likewise with Havdalah, we add a little bit of the weekday onto the Shabbat to make sure that the Shabbat is entirely taken care of in a holy manner. V'da dema shelo katuv b'riyat yom hashvi'i. So there's an additional interesting factor going on. You should know that we notice that there's something missing from the creation of the seventh day, because it doesn't say, like on every other day, it says, Vahi Erev, Vahi Voker, Yom Shvi'i. It doesn't say, regarding the seventh day, it doesn't say there was evening and there was morning, a seventh day, right? With all the other 6 days, it always ends with, there was evening, there was morning, day X. Kamosh b'sha'ar ha'yamim, just like with the other days. Yesh lomar, so what's the explanation of this? The Romez, that this is alluding lema shekatuv b'Yerushalmi brachot, that this is written in the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, as opposed to the Talmud Bavli, in Tractate Brachot. It's also organized, the Talmud Yerushalmi is also organized to follow the order of the Mishnah. Brachot Peichet, so chapter 8 of Brachot, Halacha Hey, this is the way the Yerushalmi is divided up. Ubebereshit Rabbah, and also in Genesis Rabbah, Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11. Lamed Vav Sha'ot Shimsha HaTorah B'Yom HaShvi'i. That in fact, the seventh day, back in the day of creation, was 36 hours in length. 36 hours. Yud Bet Ba'erev, so 12 hours in the evening, B'erev Shabbat, on Friday. Yud Bet B'leil Shabbat, 12 hours on the night of Shabbat. Yud Bet B'yom HaShabbat, and another 12 hours on the day of Shabbat. Is somebody trying to say something? Okay, all right. Okay. And what he's trying to say is, Sheme'az she'ira achama be'erev Shabbat, that from the moment that the sun came up on Friday, on Erev Shabbat, Shuv lo ad motzei Shabbat, it did not set until Shabbat was over, until the end of Shabbat. V'lachein lo kativ vahi erev vahi voker yom shvi'i. And for that reason, it doesn't say there was evening, there was morning, the seventh day, because it didn't set, and it didn't come up. It was up all the time. So there was no evening, there was no morning. Acharei de lo shak'acha ma b'leil Shabbat, because the sun didn't go down on Friday night. V'lo haya erev, so there wasn't going to be an evening, klal, at all. Rak yoma arichta milamed vav shaot, but a long extended day of 36 hours. Omnam, however, ze gufa tzarich ta'am, lama be'emet lo shak'a shimsho shel erev Shabbat. But this itself, it just raises another question, right? This itself needs some kind of explanation why, in fact, it didn't happen. Ad motzei Shabbat, until Shabbat was over. Umatam badavar, and what was the reason for this? V'yesh lomar, and we could say, de be'emet kein muchrach hayadavar, that in fact it was necessary for it to operate in this particular way. Why? De'acharei dehagbalat hazman utchumei yom v'layla shel kol yom mimei habriahem, because since the division, right, the setting up of the boundaries of time and the, again, tchumei, and the areas of day and night, the length of day and night of every day, mimei habriah, were in fact part of the days of creation, mivriotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they were also part of the creation, the act of creation of God, kafi hamitba'er milashon, as is expressed in the actual expression of the language, Vahi Erev, right? Erev came, there was, it came into existence, Vahi Boker, and morning came into existence, you might say. HaKatuv B'chol Yom, which is written regarding every day. Im Kain, if that's the case, Acharei Shebeyom HaShvi'i Shavat Mikom Melachto, if we're going to say that on the seventh day he ceased, he didn't do that anymore, Im Kain Halo Lo Haya Yachol Od Lehavrei Havayat HaErev, right? It wouldn't have been possible then for him to create, right? To create evening, V'haboker, and morning, Shel Yom HaShvi'i, of the seventh day. V'lachein Ikev HaKadosh Baruch Hu et tzrichat HaShemesh Shel Yom HaShishi, and that's why God extended the shining of the sun, right, the daytime of the sixth day, ad Motzei Shabbat, until Shabbat was over. V'Iyein od, and check further, Ma shekatav be'inyan hashayach, or Ma shekatavnu, possibly, what we have written in this issue that refers lepasuk zeh lekaman, to this particular sentence below, the Parshat Yitro, in Parsha Yitro, that's in Exodus chapter 20, the pasuk Shabbat Lashem, where it talks about a Sabbath to Hashem, the Dok QED. So we will continue, God willing, next Sunday with the next little part, and I'll put in the marking here. So, any comments before I stop the recording? Okay, I'm going to stop the share, and I'll stop the recording.